Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jansu, for the opportunity to present today. And thank you, Dr. Hubert, for the introduction. I'm going to, you'll see I've got a pack of piece of paper in my hand. And at one stage, one of my slides talks about the cyber-physical. So this is the physical, and there's the cyber. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit of 4IR, but this is just because I don't really understand how to work this thing. I have a lady who's my PA, and I have to just say, Belle, could you just make it all work, please? And that's the way it normally works. I just want to say that I now have the honor of the graveyard shift, and I'm also the last official speaker for the day. So there's an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that I can draw on what has already been said. The disadvantage is everybody knows what was already said and then can start criticizing or thinking about what you're saying. I also just want to go back to the first speaker, Janesh Naidu from GenderMark. In my previous life, I was...
Stand close to the mic, please.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. In my previous life, I was responsible for a production unit, making things, and in the early 2000s, we had to put in a production line for exports to the UK. And one of the machines which I decided to buy was from the South African company called GenderMark. And the customer said, "You are buying a South African built machine?" My colleague said, "You must be crazy. How can you buy a South African built machine when and I was working for a German company at the time. I said, hang on, you must buy Germany or you must buy European at least, never South African. But we took the chance, we bought the machine, and it was successful. So, you know, my passion is to say that we can do it in South Africa. We demonstrate that. Dr. Hubert is also demonstrating that, and many of the previous speakers. So I'm very passionate about that. The other thing which Janesh talked about was this whole thing about production people particularly don't read. Either don't read or don't want to read or can't read. And one of the things which we looked at in the early 2000s was we had to put in a new production line which we had to export components, and the customer said, wow, how are you going to do that? You've got local people. And we said, yeah, that's a bit of a problem because they don't necessarily read or they can't necessarily read. So we picturized everything. We took photographs of the work instructions and we put the work instructions as photographs. So what Janesh talked about was the next step from that, and that is to videoize it, if I can put it that way. And so the whole concept of picturizing is definitely important, and we proved it in those days as well. And the third thing which we did was the customer also said, how are you going to make sure your people are trained? So we said, actually, that's a good point. We'll actually build a training factory. So we built a mini factory within the factory, and we trained people in this mini factory before the production lines actually started working. Imagine how much easier it would have been and how less costly it would have been if we'd had his virtual reality training facility. And by the way, I don't know if anybody's put those sort of glasses on, but when you go into there, and they actually they took me through it, and in the end of the day, you imagine that you're really in this facility, and then suddenly they take them off, and you almost say, well, you know, what happened? It's brought you back to reality, as opposed to that. So my presentation is about the role of an industry association in revolutionizing the South African manufacturing industry. It's a very boring subject. I'm sorry to have to bore you at the very end of the program, but I'm going to try and not go through it too slowly so that you don't necessarily go to sleep. So you certainly don't want to see that. So the first one, because you can look at me and that's bad enough. You don't need two of me here. Fortunate. Oh, it's actually working now. Okay, every now and again, right. So what is an industry association? And I try to define it as a collective body of members of industry or companies who work together for the mutual benefit of the members and for the economy as a whole. And I think the important thing there is work together. Dr. Yabert also made mention of that. So certainly it is what we are trying to do. A little bit about our association, but this is not the main theme, but I need to just give you some background before I go into the main body of the presentation. So the association that I belong to, or that I work for, is called the Production Technologies Association of South Africa, and our mission is to promote, protect and support the collective interests of the production technology industry in South Africa. I'm going to define what is production technologies industry in a minute, but I also just want to, and therefore I have to go to my physical notes, because I can't remember it that word for word, is we also have a vision, and that is to be the center of expertise for the production technologies industry. So not only are we promoting, protecting and supporting, we also have this vision of becoming the center of expertise. So what is production technologies? I'm going to read that. Oh, sorry, I need to do that, I guess. But if you imagine it was, our name used to be the Toolmaking Association of South Africa. We changed our name because times have moved along. But basically it's a tooling industry. And what is a tooling industry? It's a means of manufacturing anything. So whether you're manufacturing a chip or a motor car or your pen, or the one that I use an example of in the Western Cape here, if you're eating your yogurt in the morning, you're eating it out of a little plastic cup. And that is made in a tool which is very, very expensive to make. It probably costs R500,000 to make the tool that makes your yogurt cup which you throw away in the morning. So we now define it slightly differently. We say production technologies provides a means that enables the manufacture of all manufactured goods. So everything which we make in something which is production technology. Janesh talked about it. It is production technology he was talking about this morning as well. By the way, a few of our members are here, so I think they've actually left now in the meantime, but so hopefully there's nobody who's critiquing me too much and saying, well, actually you said this and that's what you actually do. It's not quite the same. But anyway, some of the typical manufacturing technologies include dies for metal pressings, stamping, punching and forming. Again, we talk about the motor car. Injection and compression molds. Again, we're talking about even the bottles that are on the table are made in a tool. Jigs and fixtures, those are things that help us put things together. Assembly systems and robotics is definitely what Janesh talked about this morning. Gauging and measuring systems, everything which we make, we need to be able to measure it. And you're talking, Doctor, about microns and nanomicrons, and is it nanomicrons? Is that right? Okay. So nanometers, sorry. I said to somebody one day when I was trying to achieve a tolerance in our production facilities, do you know how big a micron is? In your mind it's that big. In our minds you can't even smell it, so it's so small. And precision components. Again, just a little bit of background about who we are and what we do. We have a partnership agreement with government, and out of that partnership agreement came the organization called Insimbi Future Production Technologies Initiative. Ilse talked about that this morning, and I think also Hein talked a little bit about it. So that's an existing agreement, and Ilse talked about 2,000 people being trained. And the reality is, I think, it's about 2,500 people. But she also talked about a large uptake of those people into industry. The reality is it's over 95% take-up. In other words, people have been given jobs. Of those 2,500 people, it was a pilot scheme that was run, and the pass rate has been over 85%. So if you compare that to the, let's say, the traditional educational system, which is anything between 15 and 25% success rate, this is an 85% success rate. So it is really this talent-driven process. We also have got our own project management company called the NTIP. It stands for National Technology Implementation Platform. We're involved in skills development, that's where the 2,500 people came from, and then also enterprise development, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. Dirk van Dijk, who will be talking tomorrow, I think he talks tomorrow, is that correct? Yes. He is the CEO of the NTIP. And so he will talk a lot more about that and about the whole process of how do you skill people, how do we see you skill, the process of skilling people into the future. We also have an international footprint. We belong as an association to the International Special Tooling and Machining Association called ISMA. South Africa currently holds a presidency of ISMA. And that ISMA has, and I'm going to read it to you if I can find it now because I didn't follow my notes very well. So the mission of ISMA is to help national industry associations and their member companies achieve business success in the global economy through advocacy, networking, and information programs and services. So it represents over 20 associations through the world. It's actually around about 29 now. And it has a membership of over 8,000 companies. And these companies stretch from Russia, China, USA, and Germany, plus a whole lot of others. So, and including South Africa. I'm not going to talk about that, we all know it. So let me start off by quoting, and Bob is the international president for ISMA. And I just want to go to, I'm going to quote him properly. So I'm going to read it to you. 4IR is going to be disruptive to some companies if they allow it to be disruptive. It's more a case of actually embracing it and looking for the opportunities that are going to appear in consequence of the emergence of these new technologies. Then he goes on to say 4IR is not a technology, it is an event. It is a period in time. So in this era of 4IR, we need to understand that we need to ensure that we understand the potential impacts on the manufacturing industry and how we must adapt to 4IR. Some of the previous speakers also talked a little bit about how do you define 4IR and their definition of 4IR. So it is a very complex subject, and I think the statement by Bob that it is an event rather than a technology is important. I also want to quote Janesh. Janesh spoke at our recent Future Production Technologies Convention, which we hosted in Cape Town, I think about 4 weeks ago. And he's allowing me to also use his quote because he quoted it this morning himself. And he said, we must not compete amongst the 50 million people in South Africa. We must compete with the 7 billion people in the rest of the world. Now, as we go forward, I'm going to kind of bring that into how does the association, or how do we define the role of an association. So let me start off by saying, so what is the role of an association? What role does it play? And I'm going to start trying to answer that question by quoting Dr. Harry Teufel. He's a program leader of Progressus, and Progressus looks a little bit at, not a little bit, he looks very much at 4IR and how do you adapt, or how do you adapt to 4IR, what does 4IR mean? So he says 4IR is fundamentally driven by a digital network effect. Then he goes on to say 4IR requires a shift to a cyber-physical way of working. And he gives the example of devices. Dr. Yvette talked about devices, and how do you integrate that, and how do you actually integrate it into the real world, because we still live in a real world. So not only do we have cyber networks and Internet of Things and all those connections are the cyber networks, but we also have physical networks. And this is to a large extent where one of the roles that an industry association plays is to work in the physical networks, networking of people, networking of companies, networking of institutions, networking of government, and the networking between all of those. And it can be local, it can be national, and it can be international. So we as an association do play in each of those. Our footprint is a national footprint, although I physically come from the Western Cape. We're responsible for the association in all the centres in South Africa. So an industry association assists with driving many of these physical networks. And some of the things which we do is we hold networking sessions, we bring experts together, we assist with linking people, linking companies, linking institutions. So the first important, and Hein is coming in now, so Hein, I've just made the mention that we have some of our PtSA members here, and so I was kind of hoping that nobody was going to be here that can critique me, but you've come in, so, so afterwards you can tell me whether I've touched on all the right things. So the first important conclusion out of that is networks and networking are vital for growth. Again, an industry association plays a role in that process. The next person I want to quote is Dave Wibberley. Dave is the MD of Adroit Technologies, and that's a SCADA. They supply SCADA systems into companies and organizations. And he says, you still have to make it happen on the shop floor. And I think Dr. Yebe also made a mention of that. You know, it's fine, we can theorize, but we still have to actually do it. So an industry association assists manufacturing to link up with capabilities, technologies and skills in order to make it happen on the shop floor. Out of all of that process should be improving efficiencies and productivity of manufacturing companies. And I just want to go to my notes for a second here, and I've not been keeping up with them, so I've got to find the page. But because I wrote this down and I can't remember what I wrote down. So what do? We as an association, we don't have all that expertise in ourselves. We partner with organizations, and so we have, as a PtSA, have partnered with organizations such as Productivity SA, such as the Netherlands Senior Experts, such as the WBA in Germany, that's Werkzeugbau Academy Aachen, and obviously also our own internal company, the NTIP, to help companies to gain new capabilities and technologies and skills. So of the 2,500 people that have been trained, they are in industry. We've worked with about 180 companies to help them with either benchmarking or implementation of processes which are improving their efficiencies and their productivity. So it's an ongoing process, and we will never finish it, because as you go through the one cycle and you've improved, you need to go through it again and again and again, because the rest of the world is doing that. We have to do it as well. So the second concluding point is manufacturing companies have to continuously improve efficiencies and productivity to stay in business and to grow. I think the important thing there is you have to be able to stay in business, and then as long as you stay in business, then you have to grow afterwards. And so again, it's a role of an association. The third leg is to say we need to engage with government to help create the climate for growth. Ilse talked a little bit about that in her presentation this morning. You can see Ilse is in that picture there. I can't get to there, but anyway. For those of you who weren't here this morning, this is actually a discussion point that was taking place between the DTI and industry members. And further on to say what Ilse said at our recent Future Production Technologies convention, industry must make recommendations to government for policy development. So, for next point, or the third conclusion, is constructive engagement between industry and government is necessary for growth. The next kind of theme is to say we need to be internationally focused and not only try to compete against each other. I just want to say, out of Cape Town, and I don't know if many of you are aware of that, every time you see a truck passing you, which is either a Mercedes-Benz truck or a Freightliner truck, it's got a block that was made in Cape Town. And so that is definitely, and that company is exporting 100% overseas. There are many other examples of that. Do you know that the little tap that's on the wine box, that was developed in Cape Town? Catalytic converters are made here and in Pretoria and in Eastern Cape, and they're all exported. The equipment that makes the catalytic converter is manufactured in Port Elizabeth. So if you can imagine, from South Africa, a huge amount of exporting is already taking place. So we really just need to build on that and grow that. I also just want to talk a little bit about this term co-opetition. Now, I always thought it was co-competition, but I was corrected yesterday, it is co-opetition. I was recently in Portugal. We went and had a look at the tooling industry in Portugal. Portugal, which doesn't really have a lot going for it as far as natural resources are concerned, has grown a tool-making industry which is a leader for the manufacture of tooling for bumpers. Now you can imagine the bumper on your car in the front. It's about that wide, and it's about that. So the tool effectively is bigger, is taller than I am. It's cubic. For the dashboards and for the interior trim, the center of excellence for that is in Portugal. And how did they do that? They worked together. They competed against each other, but they worked together, and they made an industry. And the reason they chose tool making was because they had a lot of trees. You're going to say, how do you relate trees to tool making? But in the early days, they used to make the molds for a bottle, for a wine bottle. A glass wine bottle was made out of wood. So they used the trees, so that was their natural resource. Now they don't have that natural resource, but they have this whole process of co-opetition, and it is driven by their strong industry association that they have in Portugal. So the next conclusion is we must increase our export potential, we must make use of the international connections which we have and ensure that we sell ourselves overseas. The PtSA, through our membership of ISMA has created this huge network of potential, or a potential network for any of our member companies on the international market. For instance, next year in June there's going to be what is called so the intention is that's taking place in China next year in June. The intention is that we take a large group of South African manufacturing companies to China so that you can meet up with the world's best manufacturing. The fact that it's in China doesn't mean to say we're necessarily looking at only Chinese. We will be looking at all the members who come to that conference. The last point is that an industry association guides members towards a better understanding of the fourth industrial revolution, the potential impacts on the production technology industry, and how its members should adapt to 4IR. And just to say, we did recently run this Future Production Technology Convention. A number of the speakers from today's event were also there. So we really had top-class speakers. We had very good feedback, and we also have decided out of that feedback that we will run this as an annualized event. So as we are moving forward in this whole 4IR space, we will bring this more and more to our industry members. So the fifth conclusion is adapt to 4IR to grow. So let me draw some final conclusions. These are just repeating what I've already said. Networks and networking are vital for growth. Manufacturing companies have to continuously improve efficiencies and productivity. Constructive engagement between industry and government. We must increase our export potential and adapt to 4IR to grow. And allow me just to say the final point, and that is an industry association assists, facilitates and drives these 5 points. But I've got a couple of final points that I would like to finish off with, which I don't have on the slide. And these are statements that have been made over the last period, not necessarily in this period today, but at some of our previous events. And the first one is as South Africans, we must believe in ourselves. And I think that is something which is vitally important. We tend always to, and I don't think that you are doing that, but I think many times we think, well, we're not really good enough. We are pretty good in real terms. We must focus on making it happen. And you may have noticed I've got some grey hairs. And so one of the statements made by somebody recently was to say, we must pass on skills and knowledge. And sometimes we tend not to do that. We say, this is what we know. And really we now need to say, let's pass it out there. We produce a newsletter. I've got a couple of copies left of our last newsletter if anybody would like it. I'll put it on. Jansie, can I put it here somewhere? Then? Yeah. There's only a few copies, sorry. And then let me finally say that now that you're so inspired, I've got 20 application forms for you to join the association. So is that a fair comment? We don't charge a lot of money, so no, I'm only joking. I mean, if anybody wants to join us, please do, but that's not my main objective to be here. So that is the end of my, and I see nobody totally fell asleep, so it couldn't have been that bad. So thank you.